Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics, the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everybody in between. This week, no proof to be had. There's no buns. There's no puns.
There's no puns.
There's literally no puns. No, we're back in the studio, not hunting ghosts, but telling stories. I'm still. This is actually only a couple of days after we did that investigation, and we did get to bed quite late. We may have stayed for a beer or two at the pub, but goodness me, it takes ages for me to recover. I went back to bed this afternoon. I got up early to take my partner to the train station, and then I went back to bed and had a solid hour in addition to my other hours that I'd had. I'm going to need some more synatogen.
Both the dogs have come up to you now and given you a bit of love, which is sweet.
Yes. Yeah, we're recording today's episode avec chien.
Avec chien. Well, shall we get into today's episode?
Yeah, let's get straight into it. So I think I will say when we did the vampire episode and you were talking about the history of them, you teased me and the audience by saying there's a load of stories. And then you said, oh my goodness, this one's cracking.
Yes, and that's what we've got today. So yeah, Ben's right. A couple of weeks ago, we did an episode called Rise of the Vampire, and I primarily looked at vampire lore that predated Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. And as Ben said, there were, in the book I was reviewing, there were some brief descriptions of reported cases of what we might call a vampire or the undead rising from the grave, and I thought we've got to come back to those.
Yeah.
So we didn't have time to go into those cases on the episode, but yeah, let's get into one of those cases today, because I did intend to look at a number of cases, but as sometimes happens, Ben, you know this, I got stuck into one case. There was so much material, and that's what I'm going to focus on today.
Okay.
It is one of, if not the most important cases from what I described the other week as the second phase of the vampire and its East European roots. Mm-hmm. It is the case that starts with Arnold Pauli, who is also known as the Vampire of Meduegna in Serbia.
That sounds like a film title straight off the bat.
It does, doesn't it? Now, I've used a number of sources for this story, but was drawn to an article by J.A. Hernandez, in which he writes, a vampiric plague in Serbia during the early 1700s began with Arnold Pauli, and it's all in official government records.
Well, when you did tell me there were official government records, and that immediately, you go, oh, okay. So
well, you can imagine, once I heard that, I thought, this is what I'm focusing on.
And I'm also intrigued by the name Arnold Pauli. It's only when you said it the second time. That doesn't sound particularly Serbian. That sounds like...
Yeah, it does.
Like I went to school with.
However, because it was so long ago, it could have been a mistranslation.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Or, So I thought about that, because it sounds very Italian, doesn't it? It may have been taken from an original text that got translated into Italian. So let's not get too hung up on that, but I know what you're saying. I think it is the fact that it is listed in official records that makes this case so interesting. Because it's not folklore or gossip. Mm-hmm. Even if it was not a real-life vampire on the prowl, it suggests something out of the ordinary was going on. It's reminding me a bit, actually, of the stuff that we talked about at the bakery. If it's not something paranormal going on at that bakery we were at the other day, there's something going on, So coming up, Ben, we have, this will give you a bit of a teaser, a man who was attacked by a vampire who then slays it to free himself of the curse, who then dies a few years later and comes back undead to terrorise and kill his neighbours.
Oh my God.
Which leads to an outbreak of vampires, exhumations and destruction of multiple vampire-like bodies.
Goodness me. An outbreak of vampires. A vampire flap.
A vampire flap.
Wow.
There is a government inquiry. A medical professional is sent there. And official reports of the event. There was interventions from emperors and senior members of the church, which we're going to talk about.
Wow.
So let's go back to Serbia in the 1700s and a village called Meduegna. I'm sure I'm going to pronounce that in many different ways during this podcast, but bear with me. This is where it all started. Meduegna, which in modern times is likely to be a village known by the name of Medveda, is in the Jablanica district of Serbia. The village itself in modern times has a population of about 3,000 people, but in the 1700s would have been much, much smaller. In 1718, Hernandez writes, the Habsburg monarchy annexed most of Serbia, which previously was part of the Ottoman Empire. The area remained in Austrian control until 1739, with the signing of the Treaty of Belgrade when the Turks took control. In those 20 years, the boundaries were under direct military rule from Vienna. Just giving you a background here.
And Midjur.
Due to the devastation from the Austrian-Ottoman wars, the region was in poor condition, with a small nomadic population mainly focused on cattle instead of other types of agriculture. Austria, seeking economic development, recruited militiamen known as Hadjuks to protect the borders and serve in the military during wartime. In exchange for border protection and military service, the Hadjuks were promised land. So many answered the call and joined or formed communities to claim their new land, including a Hadjuk named Arnold Pauli. So as listed in government records, Arnold Pauli sought to claim land and moved to Meduegna in the early 1700s. Pauli would tell locals that while on military service in Gosowa, which is most likely to be modern-day Kosovo, he had encountered a vampire that bit him. After the incident, Pauli claimed he had been plagued by vampire attacks. He also told people he had rid himself of the vampire by finding its grave, digging the creature up, eating some of the soil from the grave, and smearing himself in vampire blood.
So, that sounds like an adventure in itself.
Yeah, incredible story, right? And he told all these villagers that ended the attack. I mean, can you imagine this guy moves in, down the pub, I've got a story for you.
Yeah, because you're either going to terrify everyone you meet, or they're going to go the other way and go, God, are you all right now?
Yeah.
Either way. But in the 1700s, I'd imagine people would be quite wary of somebody coming in and saying that.
Yeah.
So, okay. And is it mentioned, has he got a wife or anyone to vouch for this? Is just him?
Just him.
Right, okay.
So a few years later, in 1725, Arnold Pauli was involved in an accident. He fell from a hay wagon, breaking his neck, and he died.
Oh, no, I know what's going to happen.
The locals buried him and, I guess, moved on with their lives.
Moved on from Arnold.
Yeah. 3 weeks after being buried, some locals reported that Pauli had returned from the grave, visiting and harassing them at their homes.
Oh, and he's going to have a broken neck as well. It's going to be all on the side.
4 different villagers reported encounters with the undead Arnold Pauli to authorities.
No way.
All 4 villagers died soon afterwards with unexplained causes.
Oh my goodness.
Now, the frightened villagers, feeling the authorities were not really doing anything, decided to take matters into their own hands. The villagers met and discussed how Arnold Pauli had talked about being plagued by vampires and the actions he claimed to have taken to break the curse. They decided to go to his grave and dig up the body to look for themselves. So 40 days after he died, the villagers dug up Pauli's body.
Oh, it's going to be fresh, isn't it?
What they found shocked them. Arnold Pauli's corpse had not decomposed. His body did not show any of the usual signs of someone who'd been in the ground for 40 days. Fresh blood flowed from his eyes, nose, mouth and ears. Sorry, I probably should have done a warning earlier, but it does get a bit gory from here on in.
His ears, that's the thing.
The nails on his hands and feet and the hair on his head and beard had all grown noticeably.
You see, that's a common thing. Like, we were told at school, weren't we, that our
Yes,
nails carry on
it's
growing, but
a
actually
myth.
it's the receding of flesh.
Yeah, so none of that stuff should grow.
But when you say noticeably, that's more than just receding of flesh. That's
Indeed.
That's like talons. Although that does imply that as a vampire, he doesn't take care of his personal hygiene. But
Yeah.
oh, that's so interesting. Okay.
The shirt and the shroud he had been buried in were covered in blood, as was the coffin itself.
Yeah, you see, that should have. There was, I presume, seemingly fresh blood.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness.
So this is 40 days after he's buried. Well, the villagers decided to drive a wooden stake through Arnold Powley's heart. You would do, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely, you would do.
Reports claim that as they did this, he began shrieking, moaning and bleeding.
Oh my.
The villagers then cut off his head and burned the body.
Just to be sure.
Well, there was even more of this belt and braces approach, Ben. The villagers that had died, that he'd visited, the 4 villagers who died, they exhumed their dead bodies,
Oh, good idea.
staking, beheading and burning them as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Good. So that should be the end of it.
And it was, for a few years. Things were pretty quiet in the village for a while, but 5 years later, in 1731, 17 people mysteriously fell ill and died within a couple of weeks.
Oh, what sort of ill?
It was a mystery illness. The victims ranged in age from 10 years old to 70. Before they died, they reported stabbing sensations in their side, chest pains, fever, and involuntary jerking of their limbs. I did a little Google with those symptoms, but it's amazing how much you get up for that. I don't think we can narrow it down to any natural causes for that.
NHS Direct doesn't say that's
no.
probably vampirism.
Vampirism. Yeah, you need to call 113.
Okay, that's a big age range as well.
Well, one of the girls who died, a girl named Stanuska, became terribly ill. And on the night she became ill, she woke up screaming that a boy, who suddenly and mysteriously died weeks before, had come to her in a bed and tried to strangle her. She then died the next morning.
Gosh.
The villagers, Hernandez writes, reported the deaths to the Austrian military commander in charge of the administration of the area, and fearing a possible epidemic, he sent an infectious disease specialist, Imperial Contagions Medicus Glaser, his name was, who was already stationed at the nearby town of Parasin. Glaser visited the town and investigated, but failed to find any signs of infectious disease and blamed malnutrition on the deaths. Basically, Ben, the villagers had none of this, and they insisted it wasn't malnutrition, but vampires. Some even threatened to abandon the village for their own safety unless the authorities found and disposed of the vampires plaguing them. Glaser agreed to exhume some of the bodies, and what he found shocked him. Some of the recently deceased were decomposed, but others who had died earlier had not deteriorated and had blood in and around their mouths like Arnold Powley. Unsure of what to make of it, Glaser reported back to the Supreme Command in Belgrade, recommending that the military execute the vampires as the villagers requested.
Yeah, well, even just to keep them quiet.
Yeah, to stop kind of mass hysteria.
Yeah.
You'd kind of agree to that, wouldn't you? Well, this is where it kind of ramps up a level here. Word of the strange events reached Vienna, and the Austrian emperor ordered an inquiry into the deaths. And I think from my reading, this is for 2 reasons. Well, a number of reasons. One, yeah, maybe that mass hysteria thing. 2, you'd probably want to know if there was a vampire outbreak somewhere in your emperordom. But thirdly, because there was a lot of outrage that these bodies had been desecrated.
Yeah, that I was going to say that. Like, I can't imagine the church would have been too pleased about this.
No, indeed.
And the fourth reason, again, keep Midge happy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the main reason.
That's got to be the main reason. Regimental field surgeon Johannes Fluckinger, along with 2 officers and 2 other military surgeons, was sent to the village to learn more about what happened. Shortly after,
I'll taking this seriously. Then,
really
sending
serious.
a surgeon, yeah.
Shortly after Fluckinger arrived, 2 more people died, and the village began to exhume the earlier victims. They found bodies in the same state they had discovered Arnold Pauli after digging him up. Some even had fresh blood in their organs and appeared younger than when they died. In the official report, Fluckinger stated that the bodies were das Vampirenstund, meaning in vampiric condition.
I'd quite like to be described as in vampiric condition, but alive and not a vampire.
Yeah.
Unaging. That's so interesting. But then, like, I suppose the skeptic would say, well, as fat decomposes...
Maybe
I don't know.
I don't know, yeah.
Like, oh, you're looking good, you've lost 5 stone, well, I have been decomposing.
But, these bodies have been in the ground for some time.
Yeah, you shouldn't look better, should you? Fresh blood in their organs.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only assume that's unusual.
Yeah. After some investigations, the villagers found that the first victims to die during this period all had something in common. Arnold Pauli.
Oh.
In addition to the vampire Arnold Pauli killing 4 men, he also killed livestock. In such a harsh environment, some villagers didn't want the meat to go to waste.
Oh no, they'd eaten the cows.
So they ate it. One of the women, Stana, even smeared Arnold Pauli's blood on herself to protect herself in the same way that Pauli had said that he had to defend himself against the vampire that plagued him.
But he ate soil. He didn't say he ate the vampire, did he?
But he did cover himself in the blood of the vampire.
Oh,
as well.
right, okay.
She was the first to die.
But maybe covering himself in the blood of the vampire meant that he had become vampiric, so vampires wouldn't come and attack him because he was one of them.
Yeah.
Oh, don't cover yourself in vampire blood.
Well, she tried that same trick, but in this second wave, she was the first to die.
Right.
Fluckinger ordered everyone recently deceased to be dug up. 40 bodies were exhumed. 17 were in a preserved state similar to Arnold Pauli. All 17 were staked, beheaded and burned. The decomposed bodies were laid back to rest in their grave. So the ones that had been decomposing got reburied. The ones that hadn't got the full vampire treatment, basically. And the mysterious deaths suddenly stopped. Fluckinger wrote up his findings in an official government report titled, I'm not very good at Latin, but it's Visum et Repertum. It's called, translates to seen and discovered.
Okay.
His report from 1732 was presented to the Austrian emperor, becoming a bestseller as well as it was circulated all over Europe. So it became this medical report was like a best-selling piece of text.
I could sort of see why.
Now, you can find the report translated into English online. I was going to say at this point, Ben, I'll put a link in the show notes, but the report is reasonably short, at least the version online is.
He was a vampire, get over it.
So I thought instead I'd just read it out because
Okay.
it's absolutely fascinating. So remember, what I'm about to read out is the official report from the inquiry from 1732 sent to the Austrian emperor after an official investigation carried out by regimental field surgeon Johannes Fluckinger. He writes, after it had been reported that in the village of Meduegna, the so-called vampires had killed some people by sucking their blood, I was, by high decree of the local Honourable Supreme Command, sent there to investigate the matter thoroughly, along with officers detailed for that purpose, and 2 subordinate medical officers, and therefore carried out and heard the present inquiry in the company of the captain of the Stalith Company of the Haydukes. So they're the soldiers I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. Gorshitz Hadnak, the standard bearer and the oldest Hayduke of the village, as follows, who unanimously recounted that about 5 years ago, a local Hayduke by the name of Arnold Powley broke his neck in a fall from a hay wagon. This man had during his lifetime often revealed that near Gosua in Turkish Serbia he had been troubled by a vampire. Wherefore he had eaten from the earth of the vampire's grave and had smeared himself with the vampire's blood in order to be free from the vexations he had suffered. I love writing from that time.
Yeah, vexations is a good word.
In 20 or 30 days after his death, some people complained that they were being bothered by this same Arnold Powley, and in fact 4 people were killed by him. In order to end this evil, they dug up this Arnold Powley 40 days after his death. This is on the advice of the Hadnak, who has been present at such events before. And they found that he was quite complete and undecayed, and that fresh blood had flowed from his eyes, nose, mouth and ears, that the shirt, the covering and the coffin were completely bloody, that the old nails on his hands and feet, along with the skin, had fallen off, and that new ones had grown.
Oh,
so
my
that's slightly
goodness, no.
different to the report earlier.
That is different. New ones?
And since they saw from this that he was true vampire, they drove a stake through his heart, according to their custom, whereby he gave an audible groan and bled copiously. Thereupon they burned the body the same day to ashes and threw these into the grave. These people say further that all those who were tormented and killed by the vampire must themselves become vampires. Therefore, they disinterred the above-mentioned 4 people in the same way. Then they also add that this Arnold Powley attacked not only the people, but also the cattle and sucked out their blood. And since the people used the flesh of such cattle, it appears that some vampires are again present here, inasmuch as, in a period of 3 months, 17 young and old people died, among them some who, with no previous illness, died in 2 or at the most 3 days. In addition, the Hadjuk Jawisa reported that his stepdaughter, by the name of Stananaka, lay down to sleep 15 days ago, fresh and healthy, but at midnight she startled out of her sleep with a terrible cry, fearful and trembling, and complained that she had been throttled by the son of a Hadjuk by the name of Milio, who had died 9 weeks earlier, whereupon she had experienced a great pain in her chest and became worse hour by hour, until finally she died on the 3rd day. At this, we went the same afternoon to the graveyard, along with the often mentioned oldest Haddukes of the village, in order to cause the suspicious graves to be opened and to examine the bodies in them, whereby after all of them had been dissected, there was found. So, in the report, he goes on to detail the state of the bodies that have been exhumed. So this is a bit more gory, but I think it's reading it out. It's worth reading it out because it's almost like his notes on the autopsy, literal notes.
And he's a medical man?
He's a medical professional,
right, okay.
At the time. Body 1. A woman by the name of Stana, 20 years old, who had died in childbirth 2 months ago after a 3-day illness, and who had herself said before her death that she had painted herself with the blood of a vampire. Wherefore, both she and her child, which had died right after birth, and because of a careless burial had been half-eaten by dogs, must also become vampires. She was quite complete and undecayed.
That's, can I just say, a careless burial, half-eaten by dogs. That's I think that's as shocking as being a vampire. Anyway, yeah.
He says she was quite complete and undecayed. After the opening of the body, there was found in the cavitate pectoris a quantity of fresh extravascular blood. The vessels of the arteries and veins, like the were not, as is usual, filled with coagulated blood. It's kind of weirdly phrased, but it wasn't coagulated blood. And the whole viscera, that is the lung, liver, stomach, spleen, and intestines, were quite fresh as they would be in a healthy person. The uterus was, however, quite enlarged and very inflamed externally, for the placenta and lochia had remained in place, wherefore the same was in complete petridine. The skin on her hands and feet, along with the old nails, fell away on their own, but on the other hand, complete new nails were evident, along with a fresh and vivid skin.
Fresh and new nails. I mean, this is really the stuff of a horror movie.
Yeah.
I mean, we won't know, of course, but could it be possible that the fresh nails are being mistaken for skin pulling back and therefore leaving a clean nail?
Possibly.
But they would know, surely.
Yeah.
Well,
he's a medical man.
Well, that's the thing. He would have seen dead bodies before.
Yeah.
But I was just trying to see it from all angles here. Maybe he hadn't seen a 40-day-old dead body. Maybe he'd only seen fresh dead bodies.
Yeah.
And, of course, there is all of this talk and the Emperor's interested and everyone's interested. Even so, though, it's really strange.
Well, body 2, there was a woman by the name of Milza, 60 years old, who had died after a 3-month sickness and been buried 90-some days earlier. In the chest, much liquid blood was found, and the other viscera were like those mentioned before, in a good condition. During her dissection, all the Hadjouks were standing around marvelled greatly at her plumpness and perfect body, uniformly stating that they had known the woman well from her youth, and that she had, throughout her life, looked and been very lean and dried up, and they emphasised that she had come to this surprising plumpness in the grave. Rude.
Well, people often admire my plumpness.
They also said that it was she who started the vampires this time because she had eaten off the flesh of those sheep that had been killed by the previous vampires.
Right, okay.
Body 3 was a young baby in a similar condition. Body 4, the son of a Hajduk, 16 years old, was dug up, having lain in the earth for 9 weeks after he had died from a 3-day illness, and he was found like the other vampires.
So that's even longer than 40 days in the ground. Wow.
Body 5, Joachim, also the son of a Hajduk, 17 years old, had died after a 3-day illness. He'd been buried 8 weeks and 4 days, and on being dissected was found in a similar condition. Body 6, a woman by the name of Rusha, who had died after a 10-day illness and had been buried 6 weeks previous, in whom there was much fresh blood, not only in the chest, but also in the fundu vetericuli. I don't know where that is, but she had blood in it. The same showed itself in her child, which was 18 days old and had died 5 weeks previously. Body 7, no less did a girl 10 years of age, who had died 2 months previously, find herself in the above-mentioned condition, quite complete and undecayed, and had much fresh blood in her chest. Body 8, that caused the wife of a Hadnak to be dug up along with her child. She had died 7 weeks previous, her child, who was 8 weeks old, 21 days previously, and it was found that both mother and child were completely decomposed, although earth and grave were like those of the vampires laying near her, so this was a body that had decomposed. Body 9, a servant at a local corporal of the Hajduks by the name of Radi, 21 years old, died after a 3-month-long illness after a 5-week burial, was found completely decomposed. Body 10, the wife of a local Barikta, along with her child having died 5 weeks later, was also completely decomposed. Body 11, with Stanch, a local Heidik, 60 years old, who had died 6 weeks previously, I noticed a profuse liquid blood, like the others, in the chest and stomach. The entire body was in the oft-named condition of vampirism. I'll just keep going. There's a couple more. I think it's worth reading them all. Body 12, Milio, a Hajduk, 25 years old, who had lain for 6 weeks in the earth, also found in the condition of the vampirism mentioned. Body 13, Stanayuk, the wife of a Hajduk, 20 years old, died after a 3-day illness and had been buried 18 days previously. In the dissection, I found that she was in her countenance quite red and of a vivid colour, as was mentioned above. She had been throttled at midnight by Milio, so this is the one that she said come to her room. Do you remember the boy? The son of a Hajduk. And there also to be seen on the right side of her ear a bloodshot blue mark the length of a finger. So that kind of, he's saying that kind of backs up that she was attacked. As she was being taken out of the grave, a quantity of fresh blood flowed from her nose. With the dissection I found, as mentioned often already, a regular fragrant fresh bleeding, not in the chest cavity. All of the viscera found themselves in a complete good and healthy condition. The hypodermis of the entire body, along with fresh nails of hands and feet, as was though completely fresh as well. After the examination had taken place, the heads of the vampires were cut off by the local gypsies and buried along with the bodies, and then the ashes were thrown into the river Muvava. The decomposed bodies, however, were laid back in their own graves, which I attest along with those assistant medical officers provided for me. This is the end of the report. So I know that's a little long, but wow.
Yeah.
It wasn't a news report. It wasn't folklore. This is an official report from 1732 from a medical professional to the Austrian emperor, in which he describes 10 of the 13 bodies dug up after weeks in the ground as being in the condition of a vampire.
Yeah. I don't really know where to go from there. I wish I knew more about what happens to the body when it decomposes, but 9 weeks. Maybe someone will tell me differently in a comment or something, but it doesn't sound plausible that there would be, the word there was fresh and fragrant. I suppose what he means is it smells like fresh blood. It has that irony smell rather than being like decomposing. And we know what that smells like because to be honest, I've made black puddings, and when they go bad, they smell awful.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that is the same with humans. So,
the other thing, it's bizarre because you remember in the last episode where we did the vampire lore, there was that whole theory, which I was really buying into, of premature burial.
Yes.
But you can't survive 90 days.
No, this
buried.
isn't premature burial, no. What's interesting as well, there is a sort of control group there, those 3 that have decomposed as one would expect.
Yeah.
And they've been in the ground for varying amounts of time, but similar time to the ones that have been exhumed.
Yeah.
So there's 2 interesting things from there. One, it sort of implies that there isn't something strange in the ground. There isn't a strange property or quality of the soil which is doing this. And there's also,
That's an interesting theory, though, because you could almost imagine very peaty soil, which is quite preservative.
Yes. Yeah. Or even very cold.
Cold, yeah. But then why some and not others?
Why some and not others? And also, if it was that cold, you're talking permafrost, sort of, and you wouldn't be able to dig into the ground, and, you wouldn't be having this sort of conversation. So that's really strange. And also, there's this notion that everybody... I noticed there that they give it to another group to do the beheading and stuff because... It must be, they must feel heretic doing it.
Yeah. Well, also, you're talking about people in a village that you know.
Yeah, so there isn't, because one other thing could be, a hatred for that person. I mean, that has come up in other vampire explanations, this guy, he was just, he was a hermit and everyone didn't like him, and so they were only too willing to stake him and take his head off. Whereas that isn't the case here. These are not that, these seem to be normally liked people, if that's a word, normally liked. Yeah, this is really strange.
Well, it doesn't end there.
I wonder does it say what the Emperor made of this?
We'll come on to that in a second. Now, the Catholic Church became aware of the events in the village. As we mentioned it earlier, the exhumation and mutilation of the bodies were against their beliefs. At the request of Cardinal Shrew Trenton-Bruch, Hernandez writes, the Bishop of Olmutz, a specialist from the Catholic Church, got involved, and Giuseppe Danvanzati, an Archbishop of the Roman Catholic Church and vampirologist.
Oh,
there's a title for you. That's a business card, isn't it? Does it say Archbishop on one side and vampirologist on the other? I don't know.
I reckon you'd have two, wouldn't you? You'd sort of, if you were trying to impress a girl, you'd pull out the vampirologist, surely.
I'm not sure a priest would be trying to impress a girl, but you never know. Well, Davanzati spent years analysing the problem of vampires, and he concluded that it was all the result of human fantasy, likely of demonic origin. He urged the Catholic Church to leave the bodies undisturbed and direct their attention to the people reporting vampirism to give them spiritual guidance. I mean, we've seen this before in other stuff, like witches and things like that. Meanwhile, Antoine Augustin Calmet, a French Benedictine monk known for his work, this is a great title for a book, Dissertations on the Apparitions of Spirits and on the Vampires and Revenants of Hungary, Moravia and Silesia.
He sounds like a man after my own heart. That sounds like a brilliant book.
He came up to a very different conclusion than Davanzati.
I bet he did.
Calmet called upon scholars, theologians and doctors to give the subject of vampires serious study and consideration. He argued that the bodies were animated by demonic forces. So you've got one side saying, no, it's the people. They've almost been gripped, I guess you could say, with a mass hysteria, but of demonic origins. You've got this other guy saying, no, it's the bodies themselves of the dead that have been taken over.
That's interesting that he says demonic. I guess that does sort of make sense. I mean, what at its heart is driving a vampire? So he's thinking it's demons. Of course, that makes sense for a man of the Catholic faith.
Not stake through the heart.
No. Well,
it didn't end there either. Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, who incidentally was Marie Antoinette's mother, an interesting fact.
That is interesting.
She ordered her personal physician to visit the area and investigate the claims of vampires. So more people coming.
Yeah.
He concluded that vampires did not exist, and the Empress passed a law that prohibited opening graves and desecrating bodies.
Yeah, because this could have got really out of hand if people had just gone around going, I think I've seen her walking around, we ought to decapitate them and burn them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, this is where the political stuff keeps getting involved. Like, are people out going, look, vampires just don't exist, all right? Just shush.
Yeah.
If that feels, there's a lot of time we've heard this. And so that medical man is basically going, oh, it's a flat. But he didn't see the bodies, right?
No, it's the other one who exhumed the bodies.
He's just like, I mean, that sounds like he's there to clean up and go, everybody shush.
Well, if you think about it, the first report is circulating around Europe, is a bestseller.
Yes.
You've got to we've got to kind of put a lid on this.
And
there's lots of parallels you could maybe draw to kind of, UFO flats now,
that's
isn't
what
there?
I was thinking, because this feels like you might have, I mean, if it was today, you'd have YouTubers turning up all over, staking out the place, pardon the pun.
Well, I mean, just to conclude, we talked a lot on that previous episode, Rise of the Vampires, about this non-paranormal explanations, like the premature burials. And before, we've talked about catalepsy, that medical condition, which back in the day could have explained some vampire lore. What really struck me about this case if the initial reports are true, Arnold Pauli and others were leaving their graves to visit and terrorise people in the village. But if you follow the story, the undead would have returned to their graves. So I can't believe if you've been prematurely buried, you go, I'll go and visit my neighbours. Oh, I've done that. I'll just get back in my grave now seal myself back in.
See, you have highlighted another problem, though, which is how do you get through 6 foot of earth and then get back into 6 foot of earth?
Yeah.
Because obviously in Dracula, he just sleeps in a coffin.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't actually know how deep they dug them, do we? I mean, that's not recorded.
No. Well, if that bit about dogs getting to some of the bodies, they probably weren't that deep.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, so I'd heard that as the dogs got them before they were buried. The dogs got them after they were buried.
For bad burial, they basically.
Oh, bad burial. Oh, well, I mean, I don't know what sort of dogs they got around there, but my dog can barely get. I mean, think about how much a dog digs. It's a few inches. I mean, a big dog's, I suppose, a bit more. But I mean, okay, I'll take that back. I've seen pictures of St. Bernards digging. But at the same time, that isn't 6 foot. Dogs don't generally dig 6 foot down.
No.
And, when you go to a funeral, when they lower the coffin in, it's a long way.
Whether they did it that deep in the 1700s in Eastern Europe, I don't know.
No. So that's what I mean is, like, I think this supports the fact that...
But even if you go, maybe the reports of them visiting people could have been, exaggerated or become lore over time and gossip and, But you've still got this medical independent person going there exhuming bodies that have been in the ground sometimes as long as 90 days and they still look fresh. Premature burial can't account for that, I would think. Could it?
No, I don't think so. And I also, what we're also getting here, though, is that guy, I feel for him, really, who's written a very objective report there, although he has used the word, like, he has said, they're in the state of vampirism. So I guess that you could argue that it isn't subjective. But he has accurately, as far as we know, it feels like he's accurately tried to describe what the bodies look like.
Yeah. And I think, in fairness, I don't think he's saying they're vampires because I think in the report he's quite careful at parts, at least, with his words. Almost what locals would call in the condition of the vampire.
Yeah.
He's not saying they're supernatural beings. He just said, this is what I found.
I suppose being a small community, because I'm trying to put 2 and 2 together in terms of how they know that they had, consumed those sheep and other people hadn't consumed those sheep. I suppose people go, well, the vampires had it, I'm not going to eat it. And then she's the only one that's gone, no, there's some good chops on that, I'll have that. Because it's probably expensive, and she's like, don't be so silly, you're listening to superstition.
Well, the first one this time round, I mean, admittedly, some years after she must have done it, it's claimed she kind of covered herself in the blood of Pauli.
Yeah.
After they dug him up. But then it would have taken, 3 or 4 years for that to manifest itself into her death. So it's strange.
It is strange, particularly...
And same with eating the meat, right?
Yeah.
5 years later, then they become vampires. It's odd.
Well, or maybe it's only 5 years later that they know it or it's activated. I mean, who knows how it works? I mean, that must have been a strange thing to witness, though, a woman covering herself in the blood of a dead man.
Yeah.
And nobody goes, maybe you shouldn't do that.
They'll probably go, maybe we should.
Maybe we should. So what an absolute pickle. So we're now left with a bunch of villagers who feel, I guess, somewhat vilified by the fact that this surgeon or this doctor has said this, and then somebody else rolls in and goes, no, it's just a fancy.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, they're trying to draw a line under it. So what happens next?
That's kind of where
it just stops.
Where it ends, yeah. But, I mean, either way, we've got so much official correspondence, and the fact the events were discussed in Europe by emperors, empresses, senior members of the church, and reported by medical professionals, and became a bestseller. It's incredible for something in a really small town that just outbroke. It's incredible, isn't it?
So
it makes the Highgate vampire look perfectly tame.
It does. But what's also interesting is if it stopped, then either of these things happened. One, it was real, and the vampires were sort of what they were doing was nip it in the bud, and they've done that. Or when the other guy came to clear it up, who was acting on behalf of another powerful person, he went, you know what? I don't want to hear any more of this. Yeah. Otherwise, there'll be trouble. You'll get into trouble if you start digging up bodies and putting crosses through them. You know, the law might turn to look at you, and they won't want that. Yeah. So they just, they might have just started dealing with it themselves in private and just gone, don't tell anybody. I could see, a tavern conversation where you go, if you've been visited by a vampire, you need to go and speak to him. He'll deal with it. Yeah. Some shekels change hands. Yeah. And he goes and does that with a body, and they just have this agreement that
we'll just dispose of them.
We'll do it ourselves. Yeah.
Because we don't want all these people heading up here.
Yeah, exactly.
And then let's go with it was some kind of bizarre illness or disease.
Yeah.
That maybe that filtered it out. They're digging up body. If there is a disease, they're digging up bodies, smearing themselves in blood. It's going to spread that disease, actually maybe stopping that practice.
Yeah.
If it's not anything supernatural, just stopping that practice, maybe it pitted out, if you know what I mean.
So in your investigations, there isn't anybody in modern times that has stood up and said, it must have been this because we've seen this.
Yeah, no.
It's still a mystery. That's fascinating.
Not that I've seen. I mean, if there's anybody who's got any medical knowledge and some of those symptoms and the things we've described, a pathologist or someone like that who's listening, who might go, I know, that could be that. I'd love to know that.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not something I know about, so who knows?
No. And that does, I wonder if Bram Stoker had heard about, I knew that obviously he based Dracula on a real person, but there is where it's set does have this sort of, when you're in the English countryside, it does have a particular characteristic to it that you think, that might be where vampires ply their trade.
I mean, I don't know, but I do know from that previous book that he did an extensive amount of research. And if this was such a big story, I mean, admittedly in the 1700s, but still, it must have been, even at the time that Stoker was researching Dracula, it must have been in the consciousness of the culture, let's say.
And we're right at that cusp that we keep talking about. So many of these stories keep coming back to that. So with that 1731, I think, was the last date in there. 100 years later, we've got powered trains, we've got prototype cars, we've got science coming to the fore. So we're really at that moment. And of course, cameras come in, and we've spoken about spiritualism, stuff like that. So we were tantalisingly close to being able to get photographs of it if it had happened a little bit later. Yeah, I'm blown away by that, though. What a peculiar mystery to have it that recorded.
I think that's the key, isn't it? It's not folklore. Okay, the Arnold Paoli, his initial story that launched this in a way of him encountering the vampire, there's nothing official about that. It was his word. But pretty much everything from then has got some official record of it.
Yeah. When you say Arnold Paoli so much, all I can think of now is an omelette Arnold Bennett. I know they're completely different, but my brain won't stop making associations.
You don't want to go there. Well, in my research, I did come across some modern-day cases of people coming back from the dead. I'm not going to feature those here, but I might mention a couple of them on Ben and Peter's Extra Scoop.
Nice.
Which is our Patreon exclusive episode. So if you want to come and join us at patreon.com/TQMpod, you can come and hear those.
Thank you very much. That's very good. we can put some of that Patreon money to seeing if we can reanimate the dead of Oxfordshire.
Yeah. We haven't got enough in the bank.
No, we don't. That was a fascinating story. That is one of those where I'm genuinely going to be... Do you ever find yourself... Because I do a lot of my thinking in the shower because I can't hear the radio or anything. I can just hear the water. I'm going to be searching for a rational explanation. So if anyone else has got one...
Certainly somebody who's got that kind of, post-mortem medical experience, because, there may be somebody who's sitting there going, oh, well, you get that effect when happens. I would love to know that.
Yeah. Well, we do have a doctor who's a Patreon. Yeah. So, maybe we'll find out.
Cool.
Excellent.
Well, right. Well, we're going to go back to our... coffins and
lovely
prepare for another week.
I've got some freshly prepared earth to eat,
also
known as a Wetherspoons all day breakfast.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?